alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hello and welcome to a fifth episode of our series Islamic Finance. In the past episode we talked about the concepts of the economics in Islam and the financial transactions and their components. We also talked about the ethics, the morals and the values and the principles that guide Islam's view on the world of economy. And in the past episode we started to talk about the difference between Islamic banking and the traditional Western banking with all its virtual components that really got the world to an almost financial collapse. And we talked about riba, the dangerousness of this disease and how it is forbidden by Allah. And in detail, Sheikh Shady Al-Suleiman from Sydney, Australia, talked to us about riba and its dangers. And in this episode, the fifth in our series, we're going to be continuing to talk about the difference between Islamic banking and the traditional Western model in nowadays economy. And perhaps there are many differences regarding perhaps guarantees that you should have for loans, real guarantees, definitely in Islamic banking. Also, there must be differences regarding mortgage policies or the policies of loans itself, whether it's a loan for production or a loan for consumption, and much more, which we will know from you, Sheikh. First, assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. With regards of the Islamic banking and the difference between the Islamic banking and the modern and current day banking, that we, as I mentioned before, we have the concept in Islam called wadi'ah, in which I need to put this valuable thing, whether it's money or anything else, with someone in whom I trust. Now, we mentioned that there was no such thing called banks in the past. The banking system started just in a few centuries ago. Now, with the Islamic banking, that when I put my money in the Islamic bank, I put it as a trust, that I trust this Islamic bank. That's one thing. Now, the difference is here with the modern and our days or current days banking is that with the Islamic banking, I just put it as a trust and I leave it there. That money is not to be used by the bank for whatever they wish for or do. With the modern day banking or the un-Islamic way of banking, they use that money. See, when I give you something, I'll tell you, look brother, I want to keep this $10,000 in your safety. You have no rights to deal with that money. It's my money in your hands. All I'm asking you is to protect that money for me. So you can't go and start dealing with that money, start investing that money.
That is if it's a pure deposit.
Yes.
With the initial agreement that it's a pure deposit.
Yes.
Because I can't put it in an Islamic bank and want murabaha, for instance.
See, this is where the Islamic bank gives you the option. It gives you the option is, do you want this money just to be protected by us? Okay, is that money just here for to be looked after, or do you want to invest this money? Now, if it's to be looked after, then the bank has no rights to deal with this money because it's not their money and they do not have the authority to deal with that money. With modern day banking or the un-Islamic banking system, they take that money. Once you put that money, they start using it for many things, investments and buying and selling.
They could go into stocks and lose that money.
Yeah, and not only that, they'll take your money.
American banks,
they'll take your money and lend it to someone else. And that's what really caused the collapse of these systems and those huge banks in America and Europe. One of the major reasons they've taken money and they've taken a debt. They've taken the money and lent it to someone else. Well, you don't have the rights to use my money however you want. So this is where the difference. Secondly, the bank gives you insurance that if anything happens to the bank, okay, and this is most banks, not all. Some countries have legislations in which if the bank collapses or whatever happens to the bank,
the government or the central bank or the Federal Reserve is obliged to
give you the money. Well, when I trust you with something, you're not, and you do your best to protect my money, and then something happens to that money, it gets stolen or gets burnt or whatever reason, then you're not obliged to pay me back.
It's the concept of insurance again.
Yeah, so there's no, the only insurance, the only time that you have to pay me back is the time that you neglected looking after my money. Okay, like for example, I was asked a question not long ago, someone who put $10,000 with a friend, and then their friend's safety box, or the friend's the house was robbed and the safety box was robbed, and the money that he left with his friend was also stolen. Does his friend have to pay him back? And I said, well, the one yad al-musta'man aman, as the scholars say, and as the Prophet Muhammad said, that the hand of the one that you ask to, or the one that you trust to look after your money, that are aman, which means that are secure. If they neglect looking after your money, then that's when they have to pay you back. But if they don't, then that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree upon you.
And you said in this specific case, his own money was stolen.
Yes.
So, and you get us back again to ijtihad and the importance of having ijtihad in
so
this
if something
field.
happens to the bank, for example, the bank is not liable to pay you back. Someone came and burnt the bank down. They don't have to, but with and that's the condition that you find modern banks put upon a customer. Now, someone will say, but I'd rather insure my bank. So at the end of the day, la darara wa la dirar. This is where we come back. Don't harm yourself and don't bring harm upon others. If you ask me to look after your money and then something happened due to a natural disaster or someone robbed me, why you are asking me to do something that I can't handle, to pay you back money from my own, to pay you your money back from my own pocket?
Right.
So that's one part that you find difference between an Islamic bank and the Western or the modern day bank. That when you put your money in an Islamic bank, you put it in as a trust, and they look after that money, and they're not allowed to deal with that money only with your authority. And at the same time, if they want to ask for a fee, they give you a fee and they do not give you any money in return. Now, if you want money in return, this is where we get to the second type of dealings with the bank. We go into as a mudaraba.
Right.
Mudaraba means that I invest. I come in to the bank.
Mudaraba or murabaha?
No, murabaha is a different thing.
Okay.
Mudaraba that's the common way that Islamic banks.
So it's not only about stocks. Mudaraba is not only concerning stocks.
Mudaraba can be used in all different ways. Most Islamic banks these days, the way they deal with their customers is that a customer comes in and has got a large amount of money, or whatever amount of money. He comes in, he says, look, I want to benefit from this money. I don't just want to put it there. My aim is not just to put my $100,000 in the bank and keep it there. I want to get money at the end of the day. Down the road, there's the un-Islamic banks that give you 10% interest. Well, how much are you going to give me? See, the only way that you could go in with them is you go in mudaraba. What's mudaraba? Mudaraba means someone has money and the other party has talents. So I have money, you have talents. I'll give you that money. And I'll give you that money, and you work with that money. You get into business, whether a business, as long as it's a halal business, as long as it's in.
Well, if it's an Islamic bank,
obviously,
supposedly it should be.
And not to be involved in any.
I guess this is another big difference between Islamic banks and non-Islamic ones. Is that in Islamic banks, if your money is working, you know exactly where it is working.
Exactly. So this is the other condition. This is the difference between an Islamic bank and an un-Islamic bank or Western bank. That when I put my money with you and I want to invest my money to get a return on it, I'll give you that certain amount of money, and I make a contract between me and you which is called mudaraba, which means I give you the money, you trade with my money, and then after you trade with my money, the profit that we make, you take a certain percentage. Now, we must agree on the percentage beforehand.
Right, the percentage that the bank takes from the profit.
Okay, so I agree.
But we don't know what the profit will be.
Okay, see, this is the next
point.
point.
Could it be a loss?
This is the next point. First point is that we must agree on the profit. The profit could be 50-50, 60-40, 80-20, whatever, but the profit must be clear. The profit and percentage, the profit and the percentage between the two parties must be clear. That's one. The second thing is that if any loss, it's on both parties. Where you find the Western bank doesn't have that. They guarantee you a 10% return a year, regardless they made a profit or made a loss.
But in the end, they can collapse.
And they can collapse, and that's what's happening. But in an Islamic banking, that with mudaraba, for example, the loss is on both. And the profit is for both.
And that's, again, brings us to another, I guess, key difference, which is risk management.
Risk.
Well, definitely the management of risk is very different.
Look, Brother Muhammad, there's no doubt in every transaction you do, there's a risk. But that risk, could varies from 1% to 100%. To maybe 500%, and maybe more. See, what Islam did, tried its best to minimize the risk, not to take risk away. it's impossible
manage
to
the risk,
yeah,
calculate the risk.
Manage it and minimize the risk as much as it can. To say that Islam came and took risk away from trades, that's impossible. Because there's risk in everything. Just to buy and sell, you don't know what risk you might get from the product that you bought.
It might take gambling away. It might take.
But Islam came and minimized as much as it can, the risk that could take place in any types of trade.
And it wants the risk to be calculated, definitely, and well managed, rather than a pure speculation or a gambling like.
Yes, and that's why the Sharia put certain laws, like as we mentioned, that you cannot sell something or buy something that's ambiguous, something that's not clear. Okay, and this is what happens a lot of times when we're going to talk about insurance, for example. The reasons that insurance is haram because you are paying your money for something that's not clear, it's ambiguous. So that's why the Sharia puts and sets those laws to minimize as much as risk it can, minimize it from both parties, not only for the buyer and for the seller, not only for the consumer, but even for the one that's providing a service. So this is what the Sharia comes. So when we see that when it comes to Islamic finance or Islamic banking, when we're talking about Islamic banking, you find two parties, both are in risk. And if both win, if there's a profit, both win. And if there's a loss, both lose. It's not fair to make only one party lose. Okay, and it's not fair that you only make one party always make a profit. So both have the profit and both lose if there's a loss. And that's why mudaraba is the best way to invest your money. So these two main ways, and that's the most two common ways that you find in Islamic banking. You've got one who only wants to put their money in the bank and does not want their money to be used for anything else. And any time they ask for that money, the money is given to them. And you've got those who want to invest their money with the bank. So we use that as an investment. And they go in as not partnership.
And usually it's investments in infrastructure or government treasuries
whatever,
or growth-like projects, isn't
anything that's not haram. So not to be involved in selling wine, for example, not to be involved in riba. Because the current modern banks, the money that you put, the money that you deposit, they use that money, whether it's invested in haram or they use that money to be a loan to other people.
But we assume that Islamic banks should have as goals developmental projects before anything else.
Of course, and not only that, they must be very clear with their customers. It's not right that I invest my money with you. I give you $100,000 for you to make mudaraba with it, and I don't know what's happening. You must inform me what's happening. That's why it's not called partnership, because partnership is when you have two parties investing money, where the one invested 10%, the other one 90% or 50-50. But in mudaraba,
like administrating, one party administrating
one party has got the money and the other party has got the talent. So it's not partnership. One party has money, the other one has talents.
Right.
And one invests money, the other one invests their talent. And this is what mudaraba, and this is what Islamic banks do. Mostly, they do musharaka, they do partnership, but mostly they do mudaraba, in which the customer comes in with their money and they
If you don't know, Sheikh, we're going to go to a break now. I guess if you don't know what the bank is doing with your money, then that would be gambling or khumar. Is khumar one of the kaba'ir?
Of course, gambling is one of the major sins.
Right.
Yeah, but one of the things that when we
would that be considered gambling if I give money to somebody and I don't know what he's doing with? Would that be gambling, or is the gambling the form that we know, like betting on?
No, the gambling is more of betting on something that there's a luck in, and it's based on games and that. But
so that means that some of the speculation that we see in financial markets could be considered gambling.
Not gambling to the sense of what the Sharia looks at as gambling in games and that, because gambling is more of a game thing.
Maybe we're getting ahead here, because we'll be talking about stocks later in future episodes. We'll be taking a short break here and come with Sheikh Shady Al-Suleiman and continue to talk more about differences between Islamic banking and non-Islamic banking.
Inshallah, on the straight path, we would like to discuss the niqab from an Islamic and social political perspective.
So sometimes some non-Muslims, they might not understand the full Islamic pictures. Anyone can say anything about it.
Yes.
So who speaks for Islam? This is the biggest question. Who speaks for Islam? No, they are not sinning. They are not sinning, but we are talking about now the general ruling. They are not sinning, but they are going against what has been established. It is his own ijtihad at a specific time.
People would see it as
Threat.
a threat.
Exactly.
How do we explain to them it's not really a threat, it's actually good for the country as well? But if we don't participate, how would we ever reach to our rights? Can you clarify with us what should be the level of political participation of the Muslims in the West?
Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh once again. Sheikh Shady, what more can we say about differences between Islamic banking and non-Islamic banking?
Yes, the other thing that with Islamic bank, it is the duty of the Islamic banks when a customer invests their money with them, that they must be clear about where the money is being invested. Now, most of the Western banks or most of the modern day banks, when people put their money and they get an interest, they don't know what happened to their money, or what circle or machine their money had been gone through, what investment their money has been invested in, and that's not right, because this is again where we come back to the Islamic ruling of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that إنما البيع عن تراض, buying and selling is only according to acceptance, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam main objective was to avoid any conflict.
Right.
And obviously when I put my money in a bank and I don't know what the bank is using my money for, then that will cause a conflict.
What about guarantees for the loan? As I understand that, according to Islamic banking, there should be real, solid, on-the-ground guarantees for the borrower, unlike the traditional banking system of nowadays, or at least what was before the financial crisis, because part of the reason why this crisis did happen and really got the world maybe 5 or 10 or 20 years back, is that I don't own this house, but I'm still on mortgage, and that bank owns it, but I still get a loan because supposedly I own the house. And then that bank, who doesn't really own the house, gets a loan on that house again. And then a third bank gets a loan on that house. So in the end, we had a house not paid for. Everybody has paid a certain installment or has a certain paper claiming that it owns it. And in the end, 3, 4, 10 parties are using this house as a guarantee for loans they are getting, although there's only one owner for that house.
Al-Rahan is what we refer to as guarantee. Guarantee is something in the Sharia, in which, for example, I want money from. I want to lend money from you, and you'll accept to give me that money in return that I put a guarantee that I'm going to pay that money. And usually that rahan, that guarantee could be anything that has a value, or could also be a kafil, in which means someone that I trust and you trust, and he'll be my guarantor, that I'll pay the money back to you. Okay, this is what we refer to as rahan. So, murabaha, and this is where we come to the concept of murabaha. Murabaha is when I buy something for $1,000, and then I come up to you and sell you the thing that I bought for $1,200, and I make it clear to you that I'm making $200 profit on you. This is murabaha. Now, most common ways, the most common system that the Islamic banks use when it comes to people or to customers who want to buy a house, they use murabaha, which is the best and most safest. So, for example, I am a customer that wants to buy a house worth $100,000, and you are the bank. So I have probably $10,000, so I need $90,000. So I come to you as the Islamic bank and say, I want to buy this house. So what you do as an Islamic bank, you buy that house. So you buy it for $100,000. Now who is the owner of the house? The bank. And now what happens? The Islamic bank
sells it to me
sells
for
it to
$120,000.
me as the customer for $200,000. And it's clear that the bank bought it for 100, and they're making a profit at 100, and they sell it to me for $200,000, saying that you must pay us or pay that $200,000 within a period of 20 years. okay, a period of 20 years. Now, this is the best form of murabaha, and this is the most safest and the most common and the most acceptable, and there's no disagreement amongst the scholars when it comes to that.
Indeed.
Okay?
Indeed.
And what happens that now I bought the house from the bank, but I put the house as a guarantee, as a rahan, in the name, or I put it as a guarantee for the bank in case I could not pay the...
Exactly. But I cannot go to a second bank and put this house as a guarantee.
Of course not.
Right.
I can't
and
use
this
that.
is what happened during the mortgage crisis.
Yes, and 50 people will be on one mortgage.
Exactly.
And the thing earlier
So
was,
Islam is very clear on that.
No, you have to... Islam... See, that word clear is the most important aspect of buying and selling. This being clear and being very evident is the most important principle when it comes to trades and Islamic finance. And because you are clear, and because the seller is clear, and the buyer is clear, and the consumer is clear, and all parties are clear, and the bank is clear, there will be no dispute, there will be no crisis. Yes, there is a risk, but the risk is always very minimal in comparison to what we experienced 2 or 3 years ago.
Exactly.
Why 2 or 3 years ago there was this major crisis? Because no one was clear. No, people are paying, people are taking money, and people are paying for things they don't even know what they're paying for.
Exactly.
People taking money with
virtual derivatives here and there.
Countries were taking a debt and giving debts on unclear grounds. That's why the Sharia wants you to be clear from the beginning. What you're buying and what you're selling.
Exactly. And Sheikh Shady, is there also a difference in the policy of loans or the aim of the loans itself? In other words, could we say that usually Islamic banks encourage loans that are aimed at production or developmental projects, or projects that aim to serve the entire community, or growth rates, or solve the job market dilemmas, and that usually the non-traditional ones, or for instance, an economy like that of the US, is dependent on the consumer more than anything else, on the consumption. Then, in that case, the loans in these types of banks would be just merely, probably, mainly to encourage more and more consumption, whether that or this item is for developmental projects or not. Could we say that this is also
with the Islamic banks? Their objectives and their aims, not only just to facilitate a place where people can put their money in, but the number one objective on Islamic bank is that it is a way for people to please Allah Azza wa Jal, and not to fall into the haram. This is number one objective of the Islamic bank. So it is a way that we could please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through, and not to fall into the haram. The second objective is to provide that facility or that service in which people are in need. And we mentioned that these days people are in desperate need to put their money somewhere. Okay. Also to provide the service in which they could help others by facilitating a loan to others when they are in need of that loan. Also, it should be the Islamic bank should be also a mean and a way for Muslim investments. Muslim investments where they could invest their money through these banks. And also, the scholars say the Islamic banks should even take that further, and should be a way in which they collect the zakat, because they already have the money of people there. They already have 100,000, 200,000 people's money there. It should be a way in which they collect that zakat and to be given to the right people. So the Islamic bank, the concept of the Islamic bank is not just a place where you put your money in, but it's beyond that. Should be a place for Muslims to facilitate for Muslims all means of finance and anything to do with finance. And this is what the scholars of current days are calling for. They don't want the Islamic banks to be just a business, but a place where an institution that provides a facility to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and a facility that we could implement and endorse the Islamic rulings and the Islamic teachings.
Subhanallah, Shaykh. And the way you're putting it is as if you're saying that usually the money put in non-Islamic banks exploits the borrowers, but here the money, for those fortunate enough to have enough money to put in banks, not only is it benefiting those depositors via murabaha or mudaraba, it's also benefiting those who don't have money, because it should be using using some of this money to pay for the zakah, perhaps of the depositors, or look after the welfare of the entire society. If they go through developmental projects, then they are definitely serving the entire society. So in that case, the money there would benefit the depositors and those who are not fortunate enough to have money in banks, and the borrowers, because probably the borrowers would include the bank with them in a future murabaha or
like as I mentioned, the concept of the Islamic bank is it's a lot more beyond than just putting your money there. And this is where Muslims need to work on, and the Muslims need to unite on that around the world. Now we know that the Islamic bank, like the Muslims, and establishing Islamic banks, we came very late in comparison with others.
Very true. And not all Islamic banks, I mean, the ones called Islamic banks, really do work with Sharia.
That's the other thing. A lot of banks are called Islamic banks, but the content of it is not Islamic.
Right.
And this is a major problem where a lot of them don't, according to a lot of the scholars of current times, obviously they've got the fatwa from somewhere, but you find that there is a controversy there.
Well, whether they were fully compliant with Sharia or not during the financial crisis and before that, they definitely had enough of the Sharia not to collapse during the financial mess that saw banks across the US, the UK, Japan, and other parts of the world falter. On that note, Sheikh Shady Al-Suleiman from Sydney, Australia, we end this episode, our fifth in our series, Islamic Finance. We hope to see you again soon, inshallah, in our future episodes. Dear viewers, do stay with Huda TV. Until we meet again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.